Hello and welcome to Electoral Dysfunction with me, Beth Rigby, and
Harriet Harman.
Harriet Harman's here. She's going to be here every week. I'm just enjoying that a lot. And there's someone else.
Hiya, it's me, Ruth Davidson.
Ruth's still in Scotland though. I'm getting annoyed. Actually, we should come and do it with you in Scotland one day, Ruth.
You should.
Yeah. Oh, we're going for the live shows.
We're going for the live
we're going to be in
shows.
Glasgow, which is great. We should stay up.
Ladies, I feel I've got a proper political buzz on this week because Parliament is back. There's a race on. I cannot tell you how exciting I found the first round of the Tory leadership race, probably disproportionately exciting because I was back in Central Lobby. The results were live coming in. I did a live hit with a politician about their candidate and it felt like the heady days of Brexit wars and Tory leadership races past.
Who do you find that you kind of warm to most and find approachable and easy to interview?
That's a good question. The thing is, Harriet, it's not about warmth. It's just about politicians that understand the business of what we're all doing. James Cleverly is very good at that. Robert Jenrick is very good at that. Priti Patel is very good at that. I would say Kemi Badenoch is less good at that, doesn't really like journalists. And it's more like we've all got jobs to do. And when the politician understands that and the journalists understand that's helpful. And what I mean is just kind of they understand that if you call them, you need an answer, or if you're at a press conference, you need a question and things like that. But who do I warm to? I don't know, it's just business for me. Does that make me sound cold-hearted?
No, it's interesting that those ones feel obviously a bit more comfortable, and presumably if you say something disparaging about them, they just roll with it. They're not prickly.
We are going to talk a lot about the Tory leadership contest because I've been doing it a lot this week. And there are 5 candidates left. And I'm quite obsessed with it.
And an apology from Electoral Dysfunction, because there may have been members of this podcast who gave you the idea that Priti Patel was a front runner and she's now out.
Actually, in my defence, Sky News never wrong for long. I think what I said was Priti Patel would be a horse in this race. And I was correct on that. But yeah, she didn't run as far as we thought she might. But I think that's partly because my other obsession of late that Ruth thinks I have was indeed Robert Jenrick.
Yeah. You were like, he's slim, he's got a new wardrobe, he's taking it seriously. You were all over what looks good on telly.
I spend a lot of time thinking about Rob Jenrick now. It's true. I'll come back to him.
I've got to get that image out of my mind.
Harriet's like looking at me going, oh my God.
I'm just trying to wipe out of my mind the image of you and Robert Jenrick like that.
Wow.
I thought we were hiring a grand dame, the architect of modern political feminism, Labour's like mother of the like everything. And actually, we've got a smutty Jilly Cooper reader over here.
Well, look, we're going to get into the Tory leadership contest. There are 5 candidates left. 1 will drop out next Tuesday before party conference. And my goodness, that is a right old bum fight, which I will talk to you about in a bit. And we're also going to consider the political fallout from the Grenfell Tower report. But before we get into it all, I should remind you that we are going on tour later this month. The 3 of us are popping up on stage in London, Salford, Liverpool and Glasgow with some very special guests. We've got Jess Phillips coming to Liverpool. Kirsty Walk is with us in Glasgow. And I'm very excited to tell you, ladies, that the special advisor turned political comedian Matt Ford is joining us in Salford. And if you've not heard his impressions of Starmer and Sunak, you are in for a treat.
I know he's a Labour guy and he was a Labour advisor and all the rest of it, but he is genuinely warm about politicians. So he completely rips us apart, but in a way that makes you understand that he doesn't hate us, and it's nice. And he also was the voice of Boris Johnson and Donald Trump, actually, for Spitting Image.
Now, you should also know we're going to have none other than Michael Gove with us, which I'm really excited about because Michael Gove is very good at impressions. So we might try and get him to do a bit of that with us in London. Although I have to say that London is sold out. There are still a few tickets in Liverpool and Salford. So go on to the link in the show notes and buy up a ticket. It's going to be a real laugh. Now, we're going to come to the fun circus of the Conservative Party leadership election in a bit, but first we should talk about the story that has dominated this week. You'll have heard that the Grenfell Tower Inquiry published its final report on Wednesday. It found that the fire that killed 72 people in 2017 was the result of decades of failure by successive governments and the construction industry to act on the dangers of flammable cladding. The PM called it a long-awaited day of truth that must lead to a day of justice, and he told everyone who was a victim of that tragedy, he said, on behalf of the British state, I am deeply sorry. It should never have happened. It was really harrowing, and it actually reminded me because I sat there listening to it, I felt like, haven't we just done this over the post office scandal and the infected blood scandal, that there have been these events, tragedies, miscarriages of justice that have kind of defined our modern Britain in some ways, and they just haven't been tackled. Now, if you were Angela Rayner as Housing Secretary, what would you now be doing to build back trust, Harriet?
I'd be saying to the police, you've got to get on with your inquiry as quickly as possible. The idea that after 7 years of a public inquiry, there's got to be another 2 years before they decide on prosecutions. Obviously, they're operationally independent. They've got to be independent in the inquiry. But she would be saying to them, you've got to crack on and do it quicker. Don't leave it till the end of 2026. People have waited long enough for that. I also think that she is going to have to do a proper look at the overhaul for the future. Is that what they've said in this incredibly important inquiry is that the regulations are not fit for purpose. You know, the construction industry are more or less regulating themselves. You know, people who are greedy and want to misrepresent go, undetected. So she's got to do that. But one thing she's also got to get onto is the people who are now living in blocks with unsafe cladding, where sometimes the work hasn't even been started, let alone finished, and finding out those blocks where it hasn't been. So I think it's a moment for big state intervention. And I think Keir Starmer's saying this is a failed state that's done this, that it was completely predictable and foreseeable. The warnings were all given, and the state kind of failed to do the right thing.
And he said in the statement that he'd gone on a private visit, he'd laid a wreath. He then said, in a statement that I actually found very genuine, he said he was going to make it a legacy of his government, and he was determined to do that. And I spoke to one of his team afterwards and said, I thought that was a very heartfelt statement that he made. And they said to me he was genuinely moved and affected by that visit to the Tower. And it did seem that he tonally got it right, as did Rishi Sunak when they spoke about it. No buck passing, etc. They also didn't try and pass the blame onto the construction industry. They accepted, as they had no option to really, that government was at fault too, because the report clearly says that there were warnings 26 years ago when a big block went up in Merseyside, and at that point, that was 91. There were warnings about cladding, and still it went on, and then there was deregulation past 2010. Ruth, what did you make of how the Prime Minister handled it? And when he talked about a day of justice for the victims, you can understand their frustration, can't you, with this process?
His performance in the House was pretty good, but I think what people are wanting from him is a sense of urgency and speed. It's not just doing the right thing, but doing the right thing because we've had to wait and be patient for 7 years to do it at pace. And him saying that there's 58 recommendations in the 1,700-page report, that he's going to come back in 6 months to give us an update on them. I think that was probably quite frustrating. I think people would prefer to see him say, there's 20 we're going to take completely on the chin right now. We're going to crack on with them and we'll come back and update you on the other 40 or whatever the number is. I also think that this warning that's been given, that in terms of criminal justice, it is unlikely that we will know if any cases will be brought until the end of 2026, which means it could be up till 28 or 29 before we get into a court for anybody. People will not understand that. And they certainly won't understand it in the context of some people were rioting and we got them, up in front of a judge within a day or 2 days. But these people who, I get that it's a complex case, but a lot of the work has been done. The police and the Crown Prosecution Service will be working off more statements than you get in any other normal case because everybody's been interviewed. It's not just a couple of PC interviews that happen doing a door-to-door for a potential witness on a street if something happens. A lot of the guts of this will have been done. And the judge has pointed the finger really strongly in lots of different areas. I completely understand why the family's worried before this was published that it might be diluted or a whitewash. It is not. Sir Martin, he absolutely let rip in this. And I think if I was one of the members of the families, I would not understand and I would not accept that I would have to wait until 2029 potentially before somebody's up in court.
Harriet, you think it's taken too long?
I think that the government have never put a time limit on public inquiries because that is the idea, is that they should take as long as it takes and that they don't want to fetter their independence. But I actually think 7 years is too long. And in other countries, they do set time limits. So, even if you do a full report after 3.5 years and you might have to do some extra bits, I think 7 years is too long. But I also think it's absolutely right what Ruth says about that the police should have, and I'm sure they have a bit, been getting on with building the case that they're going to need to give to the Crown Prosecution Service so they can decide on charges. They could have been doing that and should have been having lots of resources on that in parallel with the inquiry over this 7 years. They've got to build a strong case and they've got to get the technicalities right. Nobody wants failed prosecutions that tip over because they haven't done the job properly. But they've really got to crack on. There's really got to be a sense of urgency about it. But I think the other thing that's really troubled me about this whole Grenfell thing, which is so tragic, is this idea that the tenants in the block were saying there were problems and they weren't listened to. And that has horrific echoes for me of a fire that was in my constituency in 2009 in Lakanal House, where 3 women and 3 children died. And there was a coroner's inquest and they explained all these things that, the tenants hadn't been listened to when they were saying there was fire safety problems. And then when I saw Grenfell go up in flames, I thought exactly the same has happened. And I think Keir Starmer put his finger on it, is that there's something about the fact this is social housing, people who, when they speak, they're not listened to, they're not taken seriously. And that's something that should trouble us all. If we're to have confidence in government, when people say something's wrong and it needs to be fixed, you flipping well got to fix it.
Well, I think there's a bigger point here as well. We're now 7 years down the line. There was a body of work that was done all across the United Kingdom to identify other buildings that were the same. There was a fund put in place to start remedial works. There are people that are putting their kids to bed at night in tower blocks that they now know have exactly the same problems as Grenfell, and now know they're on some list to have it fixed, and it's not being fixed. And I can't speak to the English figures, but in Scotland, there is an absolute scandal up here about this, because there was 97 million from the UK fund was given to Scotland to do this, of which only 9% has been fixed. There are over 300 buildings that have been identified. And we're talking, as you say, Harry, it's the most vulnerable people. So there's 95 tower blocks. There's over 250 schools. There's 7 care homes. There's 5 hospitals. They're all affected by this cladding in Scotland. And in the last 7 years, there has been 1 building that has been fixed completely. And there is 1 that is midway through its remedial works. That's as of this August. And the rest hasn't been done yet. 7 years on, there are people that are putting their kids to bed in buildings that they know are unsafe. And it is an absolute scandal. And for whatever reason, it is not getting the kind of outrage that we deserve it to have.
I mean, across the country, there are hundreds of thousands of people living in buildings still covered in dangerous cladding 7 years after Grenfell.
And the truth is the government does have the power to fix it if it wants it. I mean, not necessarily that they're going to have to resort to this, but it can actually compulsory purchase a block. If there's a deadlock between the owners, or they don't know who the owners are, or they've gone into liquidation, or they've gone abroad, and if the leaseholders who are in the block can't afford it, I mean, ultimately, all of these things can be solved if the government decide we are not going to have this situation anymore. They can actually do it. But I do get that sense from Keir Starmer, is he's not going to be wanting to be in another 7 years' time in this same situation.
And this is a damning indictment of the last Conservative government, because fair enough, they put a big fund in place, hundreds and hundreds of millions of pounds. So if Scotland got 97 million, it's probably about £1 billion across that they set aside in the books to spend on this. But they haven't had the political will to crack down on people to get it done, on contractors, on building owners, on local authorities, on health authorities, if it's, hospitals, etc. In Scotland, it's the devolved administration haven't done the same thing. It, as you say, Harriet, it is one thing to identify what's wrong and to chart a course for it. But it is another thing to have the political will to drive the pace of change. And that has been missing.
The other thing is this thing about red tape and regulation being a bad thing and health and safety being like political correctness. I don't want to hear any more talk about people complaining about regulation when these regulations, actually, if they'd have been enforced properly, they would have saved lives. That whole deregulatory agenda has now got an absolute stain on it.
I mean, Starmer in the Commons did acknowledge the fact that there were too many buildings that had not been fixed and had dangerous cladding. And he did say that he was going to bring forward remedial measures and have a plan into the autumn that this needed to be speeded up. I remember watching Grenfell. I still remember watching it thinking, well, obviously everyone will get out. You can't imagine in modern Britain that dozens of people are going to perish in a fire. It just makes me feel dreadful thinking about it.
In the Lakanal House fire, I was having my dinner and I heard there was a fire and I rushed down there and there was all these people trying to get in. They were coming home from work. It was in the early evening and they were saying, I've got to get into the block to get, my wife's in there, my kids are in there. And they were being held back by this cordon. And they were on the phone saying, come out, run out. And the person on the phone was saying, I've been told to stay put by the fire brigade. And the people who survived with their lives were the ones who ignored the instruction to stay put. But the absolute horror of standing there with people whose relatives were in the block being told to stay there when we could see the flames licking up the side of the building. It was absolutely horrific. And then when it happened again in Grenfell Tower, and they were also told to stay put, when in fact the fire safety in terms of the fire spreading had already failed.
It's not just the one failure, it's the fact that these people were failed 15, 20, 25, 30 times. The fire officer failed them, the government failed them, the council failed them, the manufacturer failed them, the contractor failed them, the architect failed them, the subcontractor failed them, because people just didn't give a shit. They just didn't care enough. We are supposed to be better than this. And
they knew. That's
awful.
The other thing. It was nothing that wasn't, warnings were given, they knew, but people could make money out of it, so they blocked their ears to get the contract.
Well, the Met has said it will take an estimated 12 to 18 months to pore over the report line by line, as they put it, before any criminal charges are brought. The force has said that a total of 19 companies and organisations were under investigation for potential criminal offences, along with 58 individuals. And Keir Starmer did say that any company that has been named in this report will be banned from bidding for any public contracts. But I'm afraid for those victims' families who have been living with this trauma for 7 more years, it's going to take a bit more time. So, look, we're going to take a break and then we're going to come back and we're going to get into the Tory leadership contest. Now, Ruth, I promised to indulge you in the Conservative Party leadership race, although I'm indulging myself too. I'm shamelessly enjoying this.
I was about to say, you're far more into this than I am.
I love a race, any race. I love a football match. I love a leadership race. I just love a competition.
Shall we go to Ladies' Day at Cheltenham?
Yes.
Okay, let's do it.
With the leader of the Conservative Party, whoever it shall be. Well, look, Priti Patel is no longer in the race. I said she was going to be one of the runners. I was correct in that, but she has fallen at the first hurdle. I think that basically she would have wanted to be the candidate of the right, but that has been fully scooped up and taken up by my other Tory obsession, which is Robert Jenrick, because Ruth, although Priti fell before perhaps I thought she would, I would like to get this acknowledged by you, Ruth Davidson, that I have been talking about Robert Jenrick, much to your amusement and bemusement, for some months now.
You have. You've been like the Delphic Oracle.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes this oracle gets it wrong, though.
You do look a bit like Mystic Meg. Do you remember that you used to do the sun?
Yes, I do.
Have you not seen the other thing about me being in a pop band in the 1990s? Did that pass you by?
Which one was that?
So when I was going to Berlin last week, there's this thing about me on Twitter being in a band, and I go on, and it's a band from the mid-1990s when I was a young woman at university, so it's plausible. And there's this woman in a purple suit playing the piano, and she is my doppelganger. I actually thought it was me. They're called Scarlet, this band.
It's another stupid love song. Was that Scarlet? Independent love song. Yeah, I'm looking at the pictures now.
If you look at the pianist,
Yeah, I'm looking at...
she looks exactly like... Anyway,
a little bit.
So I retweeted it and put, I've still got that suit, wink. And then everyone was like messaging me going, I thought it was you. And I was like, oh, it's actually not me. But if you all want to think that while I was at university, I was also in a band on Top of the Pops in a purple suit playing the piano, I'll take that. Jo Yule and Beth Rigby, sisters from another mister. So anyway, I've also got some other information about Jo Yule. She's now the CEO of a charity called Missing People.
Oh, nice.
Oh, that's a very good charity.
So she reinvented herself as a head of a charity, and I reinvented myself as a political editor after trying to be her or her me, who knows.
Also,
anyway,
I'm just gonna. My puppy is now destroying a cardboard box in the background. I don't know if you can see.
I
this.
can
I've got
hear him.
A book of boxes. He's down here. Just
look at him.
Just
He's
destroying
so cute, isn't he?
Come on, Fergus, back to me.
We've completely digressed from the serious business. So I've been to all the main launches this week. I've been a busy girl. Kemi Badenoch had the most MPs at her launch. And I think it was some of the career politicians who perhaps take a calculation that she's likely to be the next leader. So they are coming out for her. There was Laura Trott there, Claire Coutinho, Chris Philp, Andrew Barry, some of the faces of the past government. James Cleverly had a load of activists and not really any MPs. And I think that speaks to the fact that as a former party chair, and the guy that went out on every single broadcast round in the run-up to that general election as the party was imploding, kind of waving the Conservative flag, sticking up for activists. I think it has gone well for him. So you had these different candidates with different pitches. Kemi's was definitely like, I'm going to speak truth, I'm about principles, I don't want to get down in the detail. Cleverly had kind of policy ideas around increasing spending on defence and scrapping stamp duty, trying to grow the economy. And Tom Tugendhat was trying to sort of like flex his credentials as being tough on immigration and perhaps trying to pick out some of the weak flanks. In a way, to me, I don't know what you think, Ruth, it's like the idea of them building policy platforms after just a massive election defeat, it kind of seemed irrelevant to me. I don't want to get into what they're theoretically going to do in 5 years' time if they theoretically manage to overhaul a Labour mega majority. To be fair, Kemi did show some contrition. She spoke about the party infighting and being too divided and not listening to voters and being punished for that quite rightly. Like Tom Tugendhat said, we're a party that will fail to take seriously anymore. And Cleverly's pitch was, we have to unite. And Jenrick's argument was, we need to stop talking amongst ourselves and we need to get back onto the matters that the public care about, which is economy and immigration. So I don't think there's loads in between them, really, in terms of policy. Ruth, what do you think about Patel going out? Why didn't she play as well? And how do you think your man James is doing?
Yeah, so I think Priti Patel, I was surprised. I think we'd all sort of thought that Mel Stride would be the first to go. So apologies to Mel, we got that one wrong. He's obviously got a bit more support within the parliamentary party than we expected. I think what was interesting about Priti is she had, I think, wanted to be the kind of the vote of the right, but also the Borisites and within the party. And Boris was a dog that didn't bark in this first round of the election. He'd quite clearly, you could see his hand in the last one between Rishi and Liz Truss, and being on Liz's side. So that was quite interesting to me. Again, the reasons that, you know, I'd never been fully convinced in the way that you and Jess had been about Priti being somebody to really watch to get right to the end. But I did think she has been a good colleague to lots of people. She had worked very hard for colleagues when they had individual constituency cases, etc. She'd done a lot of personal kindnesses to colleagues, and that goes a long way, as well as having been, you know, quite a big player. But you know, she'd been off the field for quite a while. She hadn't been a minister for a while. She'd been very quiet on the backbenches. So I think maybe it just passed her by. I think the challenge and the contest within the contest is the contest between James Cleverly and Tom Tugendhat. Because while James would never describe himself as as being on the left of the party or One Nation, he's somebody that I think quite a lot of people on the left could live with. And I think that Tom probably needed to beat him in this first round to be able to pick up some of his votes. Whereas actually, I think James and his team will think that there's a lot of votes there to be won. If folk don't think, from the left of the party, don't think that Tom Tugendhat can get into the final two, and I'm not sure on this showing that he would be confident he could, they might think of switching their vote to James because he would be somebody they'd be much more comfortable with than, for example, a top two of Rob and Kemi.
Yeah, it's so interesting, Ruth, because for Tom Tugendhat to come out with 17 votes and Cleverly to come out with 21, I mean, it's a reminder of how small the Conservative Party is, isn't it?
The first thing that struck me was I was looking at these numbers coming through, I was like, oh my God, are we that small? Like, to watch it, like,
tiny.
the front runner got 28 votes. And also, what that speaks to as well is discipline is going to be almost impossible after this, because one of the ways you keep discipline in a parliamentary party is you've got patronage. Do you want to have a big job? Do you want to have a job at all? Do you want to be in the front bench? Do you want to be a committee chair? Everybody's going to have to serve whether they want to or not. You can't just bench a whole ton of people or lift the whip from them because we don't have enough.
Someone said to me that the kaleidoscope has been shaken in this race now. Nothing you thought might apply is applying, because there was an assumption that Kemi Badenoch was, going to be the front runner and she was going to take it, and now Jenrick's coming through. Interestingly, Jenrick has worked, to be fair to the guy, his absolute socks off all summer. So he didn't go on holiday. He's done dozens of visits all around the country. He's had his Ozempic, he admitted to this weight loss because he's had this massive transformation. The glasses have gone, the Ozempic's been taken, the body is slimmed down. And he said, I said, God, you must be knackered not having a holiday. And he said, yeah, but this is a serious business. I'm taking this really seriously. And he is. And I actually think maybe that did help him. I mean, some MPs, rightly or wrongly, kindly or unkindly, Kemi Badenoch, she took a holiday. I think there's a view amongst some MPs that she has sort of just thought that it was there for the taking, hasn't taken it seriously enough, is a bit aloof, a bit arrogant, hasn't done the hard yards. And Robert Jenrick and James Cleverly have been really working their asses off. So
I would say as well to Tom, I think he's done over 100 constituency visits as well. He's also been getting around the country, and he's been up to Scotland and done all of that stuff too. So, but the party wants to see that. And I think for somebody that spent their entire political life in opposition, the bit of advice that I would give to any of them is get your head around the change from government to opposition and do it quickly, because you are going to have to hustle. People are not going to want to cover you. The government's got the levers, it's pulling them. It wants to speak to them. You are going to have to work your socks off to even get in the papers.
I have to say, as someone that kind of traipsed around to all these different leadership launches, it was interesting because we decided to turn it into a television report on the Monday night for the news, because we'd come back and I was back and I thought, let's mark it. But, Chris Mason at the BBC wasn't packaging it, and Robert Peston at ITV, they came to the Jenrick breakfast, but they weren't putting it on television. And then we went to the Badenoch launch, and it was like, I got a question, and then there were loads of journalists there that had turned up and didn't get a question, which I thought was weird. I was like, the world's changed. You're not a government minister anymore, yeah? You should be pleased that we are going to give you some airtime. And then I went to the Cleverly event, and the questions went on for so long. Some of the journalists had already left by the time they were called. He took 20 questions, and I thought, he does get it. When you're in opposition, just to get heard is really hard work.
I think as somebody who's out and is supporting James Cleverly, I think I would try and get a better speechwriter, because I think his set piece stuff could do with a little bit of work. I think the stuff that he does on his feet, so when he's doing Q&A, when he's just chatting with a few unscripted remarks, I think he's quite a good communicator at that, and he's always been pretty solid on TV. He doesn't get caught out much. But I do think when the four go to the party conference, there's going to be a set piece on stage. He needs to nail that, and I think he needs to work quite hard on working out what he's going to say, how he's going to say it, how he's going to speak to the people in the room, how he's going to speak to the people that are watching the TV at home, and to make sure that the scripted stuff is as good as the unscripted stuff.
It's going to be really a bit of a bum fight, this Conservative Party conference, because former Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is kind of going to turn up, probably do a little vignette, a little bit of something on Sunday, and then effectively he's going to bugger off and leave. And then it's like days of the four candidates, sort of a beauty parade. Can you imagine? It's going to be weird as well, because I won't, as a political editor, I won't do a leader of the opposition sit down, which is what we traditionally always do. I might have to do 4 anyway. What do you think of them all, Harriet?
Well, I'm waiting to hear what each of them are saying about reform. Because, one of the issues is, having been so thoroughly rejected by the British people as recently in July, and having hemorrhaged loads of votes to reform, what are they going to do about reform, each of them? Are they going to say we're going to go more to the populist right in order to scoop back up the reform voters, or are they going to say we're going to build on the middle ground? So I'm kind of quite interested in that. But I have worked alongside these people in the House of Commons. So although it's none of my business, I, of course, have got loads of views on them. And I'm quite interested in, it's paradoxical, because I've got quite a positive view about Kemi, bizarrely. Came from an odd thing, which is that a while ago, because she's quite tech savvy, she hacked into my website and posted on it, as from me, that I was thinking of joining the Conservative Party. And it's
What?
like, I know, it's really absolutely, and of course I was approached because
funny.
this is illegal. It's illegal, apparently, to hack into somebody's website and post something like this.
Let's just rewind. So how did she do that? And how did you find out? And how did you know it was hers?
Well, it appeared on my website. Then she owned up to it and actually bragged about it, which was another major error. But then they were like, so what was your password? Which was, of course, Harriet Harman. So it was like I was like the absolute ultimate cyber victim. But I decided that I wouldn't support a prosecution. She did apologise very quickly.
Hang on, could she have been prosecuted for it?
Yes.
So, breaking news, Harriet Harman could have seen Badenoch off at the pass back in 2008 when she illegally hacked her website.
I just thought, it was a stupid thing to do. It shows she's got zero judgment, but do I really need to support a prosecution? I didn't. But it just meant that we had each other's phone numbers after that, because we had a bit of interaction. So imagine my surprise when a bit of a while later, I got a voicemail from Kemi telling me about what her children's needs were after school and where I should be taking them, and a shopping list that I should be doing for her. And I thought, well, I know I'm on sort of reasonable terms with Kemi, but the idea that I'm going to be doing all of this this is bizarre. Anyway, it turns out that her nanny is called Harriet. So she was instructing me on my household duties.
So she hacked your website in 2008 and then she thought you were her nanny. Well, apparently she admitted she'd done it on a podcast, and she said in 2018 it was a foolish prank over a decade ago, for which I apologise. And I hope, Harriet Harman, you've changed all your passwords, because otherwise you're going to get hacked a lot more.
I'm about to go into your bank account with password 1234 exclamation point and see if that works,
But one of the things I'm interested to hear from Ruth about is, because I don't think James Cleverly is the Mr. Nice Guy that he actually purports to be. I've got respect for Tom Tugendhat. I've respect for Mel Stride. I actually quite like Priti Patel. And I've said what I've said about Kemi. I don't really know Robert Jenrick. But I don't think that James Cleverly is the decent and nice person that he makes out to be.
Why is that, Harriet? There must be a reason. You've got some history.
Do you remember this joke when he was Home Secretary, joke in inverted commas, about giving his wife Rohypnol when actually spiking drinks was a big issue for the Home Office? I thought, this guy is not suitable. He's not suitable to be Home Secretary, let alone be leader of the opposition.
I think there'd been some sort of Downing Street event. It might have been the end of year PM drinks. I don't think I could go for some reason. And I think James Cleverly, then Home Secretary, was chatting with journalists, and he made a very ill-judged, what was meant to be a joke, I think, about how the only way he could keep a woman like Susie, his wife, would be kind of to mildly sedate her so she kind of can't run off with someone else. Harriet's looking at me like, I get it. In the context
awful.
of me repeating it, it sounds awful.
It is stupid. It's stupid.
But I'm such a respecter of Ruth's values and judgment about people. So perhaps Ruth can explain to me why I've got this guy completely wrong.
I think you're right that was an absolutely ridiculous, stupid joke. And if you had ever seen him and his wife together, and how much he loved Susie and how much he did for her when she was going through her cancer treatment and he was in one of the big jobs, and how he was running himself ragged, making sure he was getting home and making sure he was doing all of the work. Like, you could not be in any kind of doubt that was anything other than inexplicably daft thing to say. And there are people that are my colleagues that I can absolutely see, and I can see their front that they put on, and that they are a different person, and they are impatient or bad-tempered or a bit grand, or they are arrogant, or, being a politician has turned their head, or they were that character anyway, and that's what made them want to be a politician. And he's not that guy.
It's so stupid.
Supposing your husband said that about you, Beth.
He just wouldn't say that.
Exactly. You see, that's the point.
Yeah,
it's somewhere in his mind.
Yeah.
It's there for it to come out.
In his mind, he was making a self-deprecating joke about how much better than him his wife is.
But it's not so much about his wife. It's about his message to men and his view about what is suitable for joking. Would he make a joke about domestic violence? That's what Rohypnol is. It's violence against women.
I'm not defending it. Like, I will not defend that joke. It's really stupid.
Yeah. Well, look, James Cleverly isn't here to explain himself, but this is what his spokesman said at the time. In what was always understood as a private conversation, James, the Home Secretary in charge of tackling spiking, made what was clearly meant to be an ironic joke for which he apologises. Sometimes just don't make the joke, right? It's not funny. Well, look, before we go, we have had a question in from John about Labour leadership elections. Let's listen to what he said.
I've got to ask, because she's finally unfiltered. I voted for almost every female candidate in a Labour leadership election. Harriet, why didn't you ever stand for leader? You would have won. And you'd be Prime Minister.
Harriet, why didn't you?
Well, with hindsight, I actually think I probably would have won if I'd have stood. But that doesn't mean I would have been a good leader. But, this was like in 2010, and the party was absolutely beleaguered, having been chucked out of government. And I kind of felt as deputy, my role was to kind of keep the party together and, facilitate the election campaign of the new leader. And when I was going around the country, lots of people were saying to me, why don't you stand for leader? You're doing PMQs, you're doing all of this sort of thing. And I kind of sort of thought they were being polite. It never got into my head that they really meant it. Everybody thought David Miliband was going to win, but he wasn't going to win. And actually, Ed Miliband won. And I definitely, I think, would have beaten Ed Miliband, easily. But I didn't put myself in for it. And I, supported Ed Miliband as his deputy when he won it.
When you look at what came to pass, do you wish you had stood?
I kind of can't really be looking back and thinking, if only, it would have been good in some ways, not good in other ways. It is what it is. You just have to make a choice and move on.
That was a yes, wasn't it?
No, not really. It's just, I do think, looking back, it was a bit wimpish that I didn't stand. Why didn't I be like eating red meat and getting out there and actually putting myself in the race? Because it was a bit of a male beauty contest. In fact, a Miliband beauty contest.
Harriet, if you'd won, there would have been no Corbyn. There would have been no Brexit. Literally, the world would be different because the United Kingdom would still be part of the EU. Lots of different things would have happened. I'm serious. No,
overstating.
No, I'm not overstating it, because if you remember back to that period, the kind of calculation that I think David Cameron had done in his head was the Tory party will be split, but the Labour Party and the Lib Dems support staying in Europe, so that'll get us over the line. Not thinking that a Labour Party leader wouldn't campaign, would do nothing, and would actively ferment the idea that it was not just okay to come out, but that it might actually be his secret preference for him and John McDonnell to come out of Europe. Like, all of that would have changed. The entire, talk about a butterfly flapping its wings. Everything would have changed if you'd won.
Gosh, well, if standing in the leadership election would have stopped Brexit, I could really never forgive myself for not standing. But it does feel a bit not stepping up to the plate, and I'm always thinking you should step forward if your party needs you or your country needs you. You should get over yourself and step forward. But I appeared to have not done that myself.
So if you had stood in 2010 and won, do you think that we would have moved on from a coalition to a Tory majority in 2015? Or do you think you could have held the Tories into a coalition?
I don't know, but I've got this, I'm fighting of not saying, well, I could have won it, but I might have been rubbish at doing it. Why are those words even coming out of my mouth?
Don't know.
It's just, wimpish, as I say.
But you wouldn't have done the Ed Stone. You wouldn't have been caught eating a bacon sandwich like a weirdo.
But I might have done something else terrible. You never know.
Okay, put it this way. Would Harriet 2024 say to younger self, Harriet, you should have gone for it?
Totally. I think so. And the new generation of women, they do. This new generation are less battered. My generation was quite battered by political adversity, starting off with a situation where people didn't think we should even be in the House of Commons. We should be at home cooking our husband's tea. So this new generation are much more tough and feisty on all sides, on the Tory side and on the Labour side. So, they will never be shrinking violets.
Yeah, go for it, ladies. Baroness Harman's telling you to always go for it. I would endorse that message. Whenever I think, I can't do that, it's too frightening or intimidating, or am I good enough, I just go and do it anyway. That's all we've got time for today. Remember, if you've got something you want to ask us, send us a voice note to my burner phone. It's 07934 200 444, or email us at electoraldysfunction@sky.uk. Now, don't forget to book your tickets to see us on tour later this month. We've sold out in London and Glasgow. There are still a few tickets left in Liverpool with Jess Phillips and in Salford with our special guest, Matt Ford. All the details in the show notes for this episode. But for now, we are off. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye!